The blazing sun of Colorado Territory, 1871, beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of Animas Forks, scorching everything it touched like the cruel hand of judgment, including the fragile frame of Amelia Rose, who had nowhere left to run. Amelia's shoulders shook with each quiet sob as she sat on the worn wooden steps of the abandoned general store. 3 days without food had left her light-headed, her once vibrant blue dress now hanging loosely from her diminished frame. She had fled Denver with nothing but the clothes on her back and what little money she could grab, money that had run out 2 towns ago. The hunger pains clawed at her insides as she buried her face in her hands, no longer caring who might witness her desperation. The mining town of Animas Forks had seemed like salvation when she'd arrived on the stagecoach yesterday, but she quickly discovered that a woman alone had few prospects in a place where silver ore was valued far more than human kindness. "Madam, you all right there?" Amelia startled at the deep voice, lifting her tear-streaked face to see a tall figure silhouetted against the merciless sun. She squinted through swollen eyes to make out a man atop a sturdy chestnut stallion. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see concern etched across his weathered features. "I'm fine," she lied, her voice cracking from thirst and despair. "Just resting a moment." The stranger dismounted with a fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle. As he approached, Amelia could see he was a cowboy, tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, and the gun at his hip looked well-maintained but not flashy. Not a gunslinger, she thought with relief, just a working man. "Begging your pardon, but you don't look fine," he said, his voice gentler than his rugged appearance would suggest. "When's the last time you ate something?" Shame burned her cheeks. "That's hardly a proper question to ask a lady you've just met," she deflected, though her stomach betrayed her with an audible growl. A hint of a smile touched his lips, but there was no mockery in it. "Quincy Calloway," he introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "Ranch foreman at the Silverhorn, about 10 miles west of here." "And you are Amelia Rose," she replied after a moment's hesitation, not offering more. Quincy nodded, respecting her reticence. He turned to his horse and opened one of his saddlebags. "Well, Miss Rose, I was planning to enjoy my lunch alone, but I find I've packed more than I can eat." He pulled out a cloth-wrapped package and a canteen. "We share this meal." It wasn't a question so much as a statement, spoken with such simple dignity that Amelia found she couldn't refuse without insulting him. And Lord knew she was in no position to refuse food, pride or no. "You're very kind," she managed, wiping hastily at her tears. Quincy settled beside her on the steps, careful to maintain a respectful distance. He unwrapped the cloth to reveal thick slices of bread, dried beef, and a small wedge of cheese. "Nothing fancy," he said, dividing the food evenly, "but it'll keep body and soul together." Amelia wanted to devour her portion in seconds, but forced herself to eat slowly, savoring each bite. The water from his canteen was cool and sweet, and she had to restrain herself from drinking it all. "What brings you to Animas Forks?" Quincy asked after they'd eaten in companionable silence for a while. "Not many women travel alone to mining towns." "Circumstances," she said simply, not ready to share her story with a stranger, kind as he seemed. Quincy nodded, accepting her answer without pressing. "Fair enough. We all have our reasons." He glanced up at the position of the sun. "I need to finish my business in town and head back to the ranch before dark. Do you have a place to stay tonight?" Amelia shook her head, embarrassed. "Not yet. I had hoped to find work, but—" "Work's scarce for a woman in these parts unless you're willing to." He trailed off, then cleared his throat. "But there are decent folks, too. Mrs. Hammond at the boarding house might need help with cleaning and cooking. She's getting on in years." "Thank you for the suggestion," Amelia said sincerely, "and for sharing your meal." Quincy stood, brushing crumbs from his denims. "It was nothing, Miss Rose." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out several coins. "Please don't take offense, but this might help until you find your feet." Pride warred with necessity in Amelia's mind. The coins would mean food and shelter tonight at least. "I couldn't possibly consider it an advance," Quincy interrupted gently. The Silverhorn Ranch needs help with mending and laundry. Hard work, but honest. If Mrs. Hammond can't use you, the stage to the ranch leaves from the hotel every Tuesday and Friday morning. Before she could respond, he tipped his hat again and returned to his horse. Good day, Miss Rose. I hope your luck turns. Amelia watched him ride down the dusty street, the coins heavy in her palm. For the first time in weeks, she felt something beyond fear and hunger, a flicker of hope, sparked by a stranger's unexpected kindness. She rose from the steps with newfound determination, clutching the precious coins. Mrs. Hammond's boarding house awaited, and perhaps, just perhaps, her fortunes were finally changing. The boarding house sat at the end of Prospect Street, a two-story wooden structure that had once been painted white, but was now weathered to a pale gray. Amelia smoothed her wrinkled dress as best she could and pinched her cheeks for color before knocking on the door. Mrs. Hammond proved to be a stern-faced widow with sharp eyes that missed nothing, including Amelia's worn shoes and the desperate hope in her expression. But beneath the woman's formidable exterior beat a practical heart that recognized honest need. "Can you cook?" she demanded after Amelia inquired about work. "Yes, madam, and I sew very well. I can also keep books if needed." Mrs. Hammond raised an eyebrow. "Educated, are you? Interesting. Well, I don't need a bookkeeper, but I could use help with the cooking and cleaning. Room and board plus $2 a week. No gentlemen callers, no drinking, and Sundays are for church." "That's more than fair," Amelia replied, relief washing over her. "We'll try it for a week," Mrs. Hammond said. "You can start by helping with supper. There are 8 boarders to feed, all minors except for Mr. Whittaker, the schoolteacher." That evening, as Amelia served plates of stew and cornbread to the hungry men, she felt the weight of the past months begin to lighten. The work was hard, but honest, and for the first time in a long time, she went to bed with a full stomach and without fear. Days passed in a rhythm of work that left little time for brooding. Amelia rose before dawn to help with breakfast, spent mornings cleaning rooms and afternoons doing laundry or baking for the evening meal. The miners treated her with respectful distance after Mrs. Hammond made it clear that Amelia was under her protection. But despite the relative security of her new position, Amelia found her thoughts often drifting to the cowboy who had shared his meal when she was at her lowest. There was something about Quincy Calloway's quiet dignity and unassuming kindness that stayed with her. On the Friday of her second week in Anima's Forks, Amelia found herself at the hotel watching the stage prepare for its run to outlying ranches, including the Silverhorn. She hadn't consciously planned to be there, yet something had drawn her to this spot at this time. "Thinking of traveling, Miss Rose?" Amelia turned to find Mr. Whittaker, the schoolteacher, standing beside her. A thin man with spectacles and a perpetually worried expression, he had been unfailingly polite during his meals at the boarding house. "Oh, no, I was just—" She trailed off, realizing she had no good explanation. Mr. Whittaker smiled knowingly. "Mrs. Hammond speaks highly of your work, but I've noticed you seem unsettled, as if you're waiting for something." "I suppose I am," she admitted, "but I'm not entirely sure what." The schoolteacher nodded. "Well, if you ever decide to move on, I'm sure you'd find welcome employment at any of the ranches. The Silverhorn especially has a good reputation. Old Mr. Calloway runs a tight ship, but he's fair. His son Quinn manages most of the operation now." "Son?" Amelia asked before she could stop herself. "I thought Quincy Calloway was the foreman." "Quincy? Oh no, he's the owner's son, been running things since his father's health began failing last year." Mr. Whittaker adjusted his spectacles. "Fine family, Mrs. Calloway passed some years back, but the old man and his son kept the ranch prosperous. They raised the finest horses in 3 territories. Amelia absorbed this information, wondering why Quincy had introduced himself merely as the foreman. Modesty, perhaps, or a desire to be judged on his own merits rather than his family name. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "I should get back to the boarding house. Mrs. Hammond will be expecting help with lunch preparations." As she walked back through town, Amelia found herself wondering about life at the Silverhorn Ranch. The stage had departed, taking with it her vague, unformed thoughts of seeing Quincy Calloway again. She chided herself for such foolishness. One act of kindness didn't constitute anything more than basic human decency. That evening, as Amelia was clearing the supper dishes, Mrs. Hammond approached with an envelope. "This came for you today," she said, eyeing Amelia with curiosity. "From the Silverhorn." Surprised, Amelia wiped her hands on her apron before taking the envelope. Inside was a brief note written in a strong, clear hand. "Miss Rose, I hope this finds you well settled in Anima's Forks. Your name came up when I inquired at the Mercantile about new arrivals in town. I'm pleased to hear you found employment with Mrs. Hammond. Our housekeeper, Mrs. Perkins, has informed me that she requires additional help with household duties, particularly with mending and laundry, as I mentioned during our meeting. The position offers room, board, and $3 weekly. Should this interest you, the Tuesday stage would bring you to the ranch. There is no obligation, of course. Respectfully, Quincy Calloway." Amelia read the note twice, her heart beating a little faster each time. An additional $1 per week was significant, but was it worth leaving the relative security she'd found at the boarding house? "Well," Mrs. Hammond asked, not bothering to hide her interest, "what does Calloway want?" "He's offering me a position at the ranch," Amelia replied, still processing the opportunity. "Housekeeping work." Mrs. Hammond nodded thoughtfully. "Can't say I'm surprised. Good help is hard to find, and the Silverhorn is always looking for respectable women to keep that place running." "It's a big operation." She eyed Amelia shrewdly. "You thinking of accepting?" "I don't know," Amelia admitted. "You've been very good to me, Mrs. Hammond. I wouldn't want to seem ungrateful." The older woman waved away her concern. "Nonsense. I took you on because you needed work and I needed help. It's been a fair exchange, but I won't stand in the way of better opportunities." She paused. "The Calloways are good people. Old Jacob can be stern, but he's honest as the day is long, and that son of his has a level head on his shoulders. You could do worse." Amelia folded the letter carefully. "I'll think about it." That night, as she lay in her narrow bed in the small room under the eaves, Amelia found sleep elusive. Her mind kept returning to Quincy's unexpected kindness that day on the steps, and now this job offer. Was it merely coincidence, or had he been drawn to her in some small way as she had been to him? More practically, the Silverhorn offered better wages and perhaps more opportunity. Mrs. Hammond was fair but strict, and Amelia knew her position at the boarding house would always be one of servitude rather than advancement, but there were risks too. The ranch was isolated, far from town. If things didn't work out, she would be stranded. And there was her past to consider, the very reason she'd fled Denver. How long before it caught up with her? By morning, Amelia had made her decision. After breakfast was served and the miners had departed for their day's work, she approached Mrs. Hammond. "I'd like to accept the position at the Silverhorn," she said. "If you can spare me, that is." Mrs. Hammond nodded, unsurprised. "Tuesday's stage leaves at 10. I'll have your wages ready by then." She hesitated, then added, "You've done good work here, Amelia. If things don't suit at the ranch, there's a place for you." The gesture touched Amelia deeply. "Thank you for everything." Tuesday dawned clear and cool, a perfect early autumn day in the mountains. Amelia's few possessions fit easily into a small carpet bag that Mrs. Hammond had given her as a parting gift. The boarding house residents had bid her farewell at breakfast, with even the taciturn miners wishing her well. As the stage rattled and swayed along the mountain road, Amelia watched the terrain change from the stark rock faces near the mining town to more gentle slopes covered with aspens and pines. After nearly 2 hours of travel, they descended into a broad valley carved by a winding river, where the landscape opened up to reveal vast meadows and pastures. "Silverhorn land," the driver announced as they passed under a wooden arch adorned with a pair of crossed silver-tipped bull horns. "Finest horse ranch in Colorado Territory." Amelia peered out the window, impressed by the well-maintained fences and the healthy horses grazing in the distance. The main house came into view as they rounded a bend, a substantial 2-story structure of logs and stone with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Several outbuildings, a bunkhouse, and what appeared to be a foreman's cottage completed the settlement. The stage pulled up before the main house, and Amelia gathered her courage along with her bag. As she stepped down, the front door opened, and a small, wiry woman with iron-gray hair emerged. "You must be Miss Rose," she said briskly. "I'm Mrs. Perkins, the housekeeper. Mr. Quincy said to expect you on today's stage." "Yes, madam," Amelia replied. "Thank you for the opportunity." Mrs. Perkins gave her a quick once-over. "Can you start today? There's mending piled to the ceiling and sheets to be turned." "Of course," Amelia said, hiding her disappointment at not seeing Quincy. "Good, follow me. I'll show you where you'll sleep and what needs doing." Amelia's room turned out to be small but clean, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out over the horse pastures. After quickly unpacking her few belongings, she followed Mrs. Perkins to a sunny room at the back of the house where piles of linens and clothing awaited attention. "The men are hard on their clothes," Mrs. Perkins explained. "And with 20 hands, plus the bunkhouse linens, there's always mending to be done." Amelia set to work immediately, grateful for the familiar task that allowed her mind to wander as her hands stayed busy. She had been working for about an hour when the door opened and Quincy Calloway stepped into the room. "Miss Rose," he said, removing his hat. "You came." Amelia set aside the shirt she was mending and stood. "Mr. Calloway, thank you for the offer. It was most generous." He seemed taller than she remembered, his shoulders broader in the confines of the house than they had appeared on the street. His sandy hair was slightly damp, as if he'd just washed up, and his blue eyes were warm with welcome. "I hope your journey was comfortable," he said. "And that Mrs. Perkins hasn't overwhelmed you on your first day." "Not at all," Amelia replied. "I'm happy to be useful." Quincy nodded, seeming pleased. "You'll take supper with us in the main house. My father is anxious to meet you. He doesn't get much company these days, with his health being what it is." "I look forward to it," Amelia said, though the prospect of meeting the ranch patriarch made her nervous. Quincy lingered a moment longer as if wanting to say more, then settled for a simple, "Welcome to Silverhorn, Miss Rose," before replacing his hat and departing. Mrs. Perkins returned shortly after. "I see you've reacquainted yourself with the young master," she said with a knowing glance. "Interesting that he personally wrote to offer you this position, not usually his domain." "We met briefly in town," Amelia explained, feeling her cheeks warm. "He was kind enough to help me when I was in a difficult situation." Mrs. Perkins replied noncommittally. "Well, you'd best freshen up before supper. Old Mr. Calloway may be failing in health, but his eyes miss nothing, and he expects proper manners at his table." At precisely 6 o'clock, Amelia presented herself at the dining room door. She had changed into her one good dress, a simple blue cotton that had seen better days, but was at least clean and pressed. The dining room was dominated by a massive oak table that could easily seat 12, though only 3 places were set at one end. A large stone fireplace occupied the far wall, and mounted above it was the massive head of a bull elk whose antlers had been dipped in silver, the Silverhorn's namesake, she presumed. An elderly man sat at the head of the table, straight-backed despite his obvious frailty. Jacob Calloway had the same blue eyes as his son, though time had faded them somewhat, and his once powerful frame was now diminished with age. Still, there was an undeniable authority in his bearing. "So you're the young woman Quincy's been talking about," he said by way of greeting, his voice surprisingly strong. "Come closer where I can see you properly." Amelia approached, nerves fluttering in her stomach. "Good evening, Mr. Calloway. I'm Amelia Rose. Thank you for having me in your home." The old man studied her face. "My son says he found you half-starved in town, says you've got grit, refusing his money but taking his suggestion for work." He nodded, apparently satisfied with what he saw. "Sit down, Miss Rose. My son will join us momentarily." Amelia took the indicated chair, grateful when Quincy entered the room a minute later, sparing her from having to make conversation alone with the intimidating patriarch. "Father, Miss Rose," Quincy acknowledged them both as he took his seat. "I trust you're settling in well." He directed to Amelia. "Yes, thank you," she replied. "Everyone has been most welcoming." A young Mexican woman named Maria served the meal, a hearty stew with freshly baked bread and vegetables from the ranch garden. The food was simple but excellent, far better than the boarding house fare. Conversation flowed surprisingly easily. Old Mr. Calloway was curious about Amelia's background, though he refrained from asking directly what had brought her to Anima's Forks alone and destitute. Quincy spoke of ranch business horses to be delivered to the army at Fort Collins, cattle to be moved to winter pasture, repairs needed before the snow came. "You're educated," Jacob observed when Amelia made a comment about the book she'd noticed on the sideboard, a volume of Tennyson's poetry. "Not common for a woman in these parts to recognize poetry. My father was a professor of literature before he died," Amelia explained. "He believed women deserved education as much as men." Jacob harumphed. "Progressive thinking might have done my Catherine some good to have such a father." A shadow crossed his face. "My wife never quite adjusted to ranch life, too isolated for her tastes. Mother was raised in Philadelphia," Quincy explained quietly to Amelia. "The frontier was challenging for her." There was a story there, Amelia sensed, but it wasn't her place to pry. She simply nodded her understanding. After the meal, Jacob excused himself, claiming fatigue, though Amelia suspected he was giving his son an opportunity to speak with her privately. "Would you care to see the garden?" Quincy asked once his father had been helped to his room by Maria. "It's at its best in the evening light." The garden behind the house was a surprisingly lush oasis, with neat rows of vegetables giving way to flower beds that blazed with late summer color. A small bench sat beneath an apple tree heavy with ripening fruit. "Your father is quite direct," Amelia commented as they strolled along a gravel path. Quincy chuckled. "That's a diplomatic way of putting it. Age and illness have only made him more forthright." He glanced at her. "I hope he didn't make you uncomfortable." "Not at all," Amelia assured him. "I find honesty refreshing after." She stopped herself, realizing she was about to reveal more than she intended. "After what?" Quincy asked gently. Amelia hesitated, then decided that some truth was owed to this man who had helped her without question. "After living with lies for so long," she admitted. "My situation in Denver became untenable. I had to leave rather suddenly." "I suspected you were running from something," Quincy said. "Or someone." "Both," Amelia replied softly, "but I'd rather not discuss it if you don't mind." Quincy nodded. "Your past is your own business, Miss Rose. Here at Silverhorn, we judge people by their actions, not their history." "Thank you," she said, genuinely moved by his understanding. "And please call me Amelia." "Amelia," he repeated, the name sounding somehow special in his deep voice. "Then you must call me Quincy, at least when we're not in my father's presence. He's a stickler for propriety." They had reached the bench, and by unspoken mutual consent they sat. The evening was drawing in, painting the distant mountains with gold and purple as the sun began its descent. "Why did you tell me you were the foreman?" Amelia asked suddenly. "When we met in town." Quincy looked sheepish. "Force of habit, I suppose." "When I travel to town on ranch business, I prefer people not to know I'm a Calloway. It simplifies things." "How so?" "There are always those looking to curry favor with the largest landowner in the county," he explained. "And then there are the mothers with eligible daughters." He smiled wryly. "Being seen as a hired hand filters out those who aren't genuine. A test of character," Amelia observed, "something like that." He turned to face her more directly. "I want you to know that my offering you a position here wasn't charity. We genuinely need the help, and Mrs. Perkins speaks highly of your work already." "I'm grateful for the opportunity," Amelia said sincerely, "and I promise I won't disappoint you or your father." As darkness fell, they returned to the house, a comfortable silence between them. At the foot of the stairs that led to the upper floor and Amelia's small room, Quincy paused. "Good night, Amelia," he said. "I'm glad you decided to come to Silverhorn." "So am I," she replied, and meant it. In the days that followed, Amelia settled into the rhythm of ranch life. Her duties were similar to those at the boarding house, but the environment was vastly different. Instead of the constant noise and bustle of miners coming and going, there was the steady, predictable pace of the ranch breakfast at dawn, the men leaving for their day's work, midday meal prepared for those near the main house, afternoon chores, and then supper when everyone returned. Mrs. Perkins proved to be stern but fair, not unlike Mrs. Hammond, though perhaps warmer beneath her businesslike exterior. Maria, who helped with cooking and cleaning, became a friendly face, though her English was limited and Amelia's Spanish non-existent. Old Mr. Calloway insisted that Amelia join the family for supper each evening, a custom that both thrilled and unnerved her. Thrilled, because it meant seeing Quincy at the end of each day, unnerved because Jacob Calloway's sharp eyes seemed to miss nothing. "You're running from a man," he stated bluntly one evening when Quincy had been delayed by a problem with a sick horse. "Husband, suitor," Amelia nearly choked on her water. "Sir, I don't bother denying it," the old man said, though not unkindly. "I've seen enough frightened women in my time to recognize the signs. You're constantly watchful, you startle at unexpected noises, and you've given a false name to Mrs. Perkins for your references." Caught off guard by his perception, Amelia set down her fork. "How did you know about the references?" Jacob waved a gnarled hand. "Mrs. Perkins is thorough. She sent a letter to the Denver address you provided. It came back marked no such person, she told me naturally." Amelia's heart sank. "I see. Will you be asking me to leave then?" "Did I say that?" Jacob looked annoyed. "Your work is good, you're respectful, and you've brought a spark back to my son's eye that I haven't seen since his mother died. I don't care what name you use or what you're running from so long as you don't bring trouble to my door." Relief washed over her. "No, sir." "I won't bring trouble. See that you don't." Jacob fixed her with a penetrating stare. "But know this, Miss Rose, or whatever your name truly is, Silverhorn protects its own. If someone comes looking for you, they'll find 20 men who don't take kindly to those who threaten women." Unexpected tears pricked at Amelia's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Jacob nodded once, then returned to his meal as if the conversation had never happened. Later that evening, when Quincy finally joined them for coffee in the sitting room, he immediately sensed something had transpired. "Everything all right?" he asked, looking between Amelia's still flushed face and his father's impassive expression. "Just getting better acquainted," Jacob said. "Miss Rose was telling me about her skill with needlework. Thought she might help with those new curtains your mother always wanted for the parlor." It was a lie, but a kindly meant one, and Amelia played along. "Yes, I'd be happy to help with that project." Quincy didn't seem entirely convinced, but he let the matter drop, instead telling them about the horse he'd been tending, a valuable mare that had somehow gotten into a patch of toxic weeds. "She'll recover," he concluded, but it was a close call. Bennett rode out to check the south pasture fences. "Those weeds shouldn't have been accessible," Jacob frowned. "Sabotage, you think?" Quincy shrugged. "Hard to say. Could be natural damage to the fence, could be deliberate. Bennett will report back tomorrow." Amelia looked between them. "Does that happen often? Sabotage, I mean." "More than we'd like," Quincy admitted. "The Silverhorn's success has bred resentment in some quarters, particularly with the Maxwell outfit to the north. They've been trying to expand their grazing lands for years." "James Maxwell is a snake," Jacob growled. "Always has been, always will be. Never forgave me for winning this land in a fair poker game 30 years ago." "Ancient history, father," Quincy said, though his expression was troubled, but his sons seemed determined to carry on the grudge. The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that, but Amelia noticed that Quincy seemed preoccupied for the rest of the evening. The next morning, as Amelia was hanging laundry in the brisk autumn air, she saw a rider approaching at speed. The man, Bennett, she presumed rode straight to the main house, dismounted in a hurry, and disappeared inside. Minutes later, Quincy emerged, his expression grim, and headed for the bunkhouse. By midday, a tension had settled over the ranch. Men rode out in pairs, heavily armed, and Mrs. Perkins instructed Maria and Amelia to stay close to the main house. "What's happening?" Amelia asked as she helped the housekeeper prepare a cold lunch for the men who remained near the ranch buildings. "Trouble with the Maxwells, most likely," Mrs. Perkins replied tersely. "Best stay clear of windows and doors until Mr. Quincy gives the all clear." The afternoon dragged by with agonizing slowness. Amelia tried to focus on her mending, but every sound from outside sent her heart racing. By the time the sun began to set, her nerves were stretched to breaking. Finally, the sound of multiple horses approaching drew her to the window despite Mrs. Perkins's warning. Quincy led a group of 5 men back into the ranch yard. All appeared unharmed, though their expressions were somber. Supper that evening was a tense affair. Jacob questioned Quincy closely about what they'd found, while Amelia tried to make herself as unobtrusive as possible. "Fence was cut in 3 places," Quincy reported. "And we found tracks leading back toward Maxwell land. Looks like they drove a small herd through the breach, hoping to scatter our horses." "Damned fools," Jacob muttered. "They'll start a war yet." "I've posted extra guards," Quincy said, "and sent word to the sheriff in Anima's Forks, though I doubt he'll do much. Maxwell's bought his loyalty many times over." "What about your men?" Amelia found herself asking. "Are they in danger?" Quincy's expression softened slightly at her concern. "They know the risks of working at Silverhorn, but we're careful. No one rides alone and everyone is armed." "This isn't the first time, is it?" she pressed. "This feud with the Maxwells?" "No," Jacob answered grimly. "James Maxwell and I have been at odds since '41. Started over a land claim, grew worse when I won this valley from him in a poker game he insisted on. He claimed I cheated, but everyone at that table knew I played fair. And now his sons carry on the fight," Quincy added. "Particularly Clive, the eldest. He's convinced my father somehow stole his birthright." The implications troubled Amelia deeply. Her own problems suddenly seemed small compared to the potential for violence hanging over the Silverhorn. Yet instead of increasing her anxiety, the revelation gave her a strange sense of purpose. These people had taken her in, offered protection. Perhaps she could repay that kindness somehow. "Is there anything I can do to help?" she asked. Quincy gave her a genuine smile, the first since the trouble began. "Just carry on as you have been. Having the house running smoothly is more important than you might think. Keeps morale up," Jacob agreed. "Men fight better when they've got decent food in their bellies and clean shirts on their backs." After dinner, Quincy escorted Amelia to the garden, though the pleasant evening ritual now felt overshadowed by the day's events. "I'm sorry you've been drawn into this," he said as they sat on their usual bench. "The feud with the Maxwells. It's been going on so long, sometimes I forget how it must appear to outsiders." "You have nothing to apologize for," Amelia assured him. "Every family has its burdens to bear." Quincy studied her face in the gathering twilight. "You speak from experience." It wasn't a question, but Amelia found herself wanting to answer anyway. In the weeks since coming to Silverhorn, she had grown to trust Quincy, his steady presence, his quiet strength, his unfailing kindness. "My father died when I was 16, she began hesitantly. "He left debts that my mother and I couldn't pay. We lost our home in Boston and moved west, hoping for a fresh start in Denver." She paused, the memories painful even after 3 years. Mother remarried too quickly. Arthur Blackburn seemed charming at first, a successful businessman with political connections. "But," Quincy prompted gently when she fell silent, "but appearances can be deceiving," Amelia continued. "Once they were married, Arthur showed his true nature. He was cruel to my mother, controlling and manipulative. When she died last year of pneumonia officially, though I believe her spirit was broken long before her body failed, he turned his attention to me." Quincy's hands tightened into fists. "He hurt you." "Not physically, at least not often. His weapons were words and threats. He arranged a marriage for me with one of his business associates, a man older than my father would have been, with a reputation for cruelty toward his previous wives." Amelia shuddered at the memory. "When I refused, Arthur locked me in my room, said he'd keep me there until the wedding day if necessary. That's when I knew I had to escape." "So you ran," Quincy said, understanding dawning in his eyes. Amelia nodded. "I took what little money I could find and fled in the night. I traveled as far as I could, always looking over my shoulder. By the time I reached Anima's Forks, I was desperate. And then we met," Quincy finished softly. "Yes." Amelia managed a small smile. "You were the first real kindness I'd encountered since leaving Denver." Quincy reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. "Amelia, I swear to you, as long as you're at Silverhorn, you're safe. Arthur Blackburn will never hurt you again." The conviction in his voice, the warmth of his hand around hers, the steady blue of his eyes in the fading light all combined to create a feeling Amelia had almost forgotten existed. Security. "Thank you," she whispered, allowing herself to lean slightly against his solid shoulder. They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell, the troubles of the past and the threats of the present momentarily held at bay by the simple comfort of human connection. The next 2 weeks passed in relative calm. There were no further incidents with the Maxwells, though the extra patrols continued. Amelia settled deeper into life at Silverhorn, finding unexpected joy in the simple routines and the growing closeness she felt with Quincy. Their evening walks in the garden had become a cherished ritual, a time when they could speak freely away from Jacob's watchful eyes and the busy household. Sometimes they discussed books. Quincy had a surprisingly extensive library inherited from his mother, and sometimes they simply enjoyed the peace of the garden as autumn painted the landscape in fiery hues. On a particularly fine October afternoon, Quincy found Amelia in the sewing room, working on the curtains that had become an actual project rather than just Jacob's convenient fiction. "I need to ride into Anima's Forks tomorrow," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "Would you like to come along? I thought you might want to visit Mrs. Hammond, let her know you're faring well." Amelia's heart lifted at the prospect of a trip. Though she loved Silverhorn, she hadn't left the ranch since arriving almost a month earlier. "I'd like that very much," she replied. "Mrs. Hammond was kind to me. I've been meaning to write, but a visit would be better." "Good," Quincy smiled. "We'll leave after breakfast. It's about 2 hours each way, so we'll have a few hours in town before heading back." The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect day for riding. Amelia wore her blue dress, now mended and refreshed under her careful hands, with a warm shawl borrowed from Mrs. Perkins. Quincy had arranged for her to ride a gentle mare named Daisy, as the buggy would have taken too long on the mountain roads. "I don't know if I can," Amelia admitted when she saw the saddle. "I've never ridden before, not properly." Quincy looked surprised, then understanding dawned. "Of course, Eastern upbringing, well, there's a first time for everything." He adjusted the stirrups to accommodate her skirts. "I'll lead Daisy until you're comfortable. She's the sweetest-tempered horse on the ranch, perfect for beginners." With Quincy's patient instruction, Amelia found herself astride the mare, clutching the saddle horn nervously as they set out. By the time they reached the arch marking the boundary of Silverhorn land, she had relaxed enough to enjoy the experience, though she was grateful for Daisy's placid nature. The journey to town passed quickly, filled with Quincy's stories about the landmarks they passed and the history of the valley. Amelia found herself laughing more than she had in years, charmed by his wry observations and obvious love for his homeland. As they approached Anima's Forks, however, Amelia felt a flutter of anxiety. What if someone from her past had traced her here? The fear must have shown on her face because Quincy reined his horse closer to hers. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Just nervous," she admitted. "Being in public again?" Quincy nodded, understanding. "We'll be careful, and we won't stay longer than necessary." The town looked much as Amelia remembered it, though busier now with the influx of autumn supplies before winter isolated the high mountain community. They stabled their horses at the livery, then walked to Mrs. Hammond's boarding house. The widow was delighted to see Amelia, insisting they stay for tea. "You're looking well," she observed, taking in Amelia's healthy appearance. "Ranch life agrees with you." "It does," Amelia confirmed, accepting a cup of tea. "I've never been happier." Mrs. Hammond's sharp eyes flicked between Amelia and Quincy, noting their easy companionship. "I see," she said with a knowing smile. "Well, Mr. Calloway, you've taken good care of our girl." Quincy looked slightly embarrassed. "Miss Rose has proven invaluable at Silverhorn. My father quite depends on her company in the evenings." "Just your father?" Mrs. Hammond asked innocently, making Amelia blush. After tea, they visited the mercantile, where Quincy had a list of supplies to purchase. The shopkeeper, Mr. Whittaker's brother as it turned out, was effusively friendly to young Mr. Calloway, confirming Quincy's earlier comments about how differently people treated him when they knew his family name. As Quincy haggled good-naturedly over the price of coffee, Amelia browsed the shelves, enjoying the simple pleasure of looking at goods that had been unavailable on the ranch. She was examining a display of hair ribbons when the shop door opened, admitting a well-dressed man she didn't recognize. "Fine day, isn't it?" the stranger commented, tipping his hat to her. Something in his manner too smooth, too practiced put Amelia on alert. "Yes, quite pleasant," she replied neutrally, moving away from him toward where Quincy was concluding his business. The stranger's eyes followed her, a calculating look that sent a chill down Amelia's spine. She reached Quincy's side and touched his arm lightly. "Ready to go?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Quincy glanced down at her, then followed her gaze to the stranger, who was now examining a display of tobacco while clearly watching them from the corner of his eye. "Just about," Quincy replied, his voice casual though his posture had tensed. "Mr. Whitaker will deliver these supplies to the Silverhorn stage day after tomorrow." He placed a protective hand at the small of Amelia's back as they moved toward the door. Outside on the boardwalk, Amelia released a shaky breath. "That man, there was something about him, I noticed," Quincy said grimly. "I've seen his type before, looking for someone most likely." He guided her quickly along the street toward the livery. "Did he seem familiar at all? Could he be connected to your stepfather?" "I don't know," Amelia said, her heart racing. "I never met most of Arthur's associates." "Let's not take chances," Quincy decided. "We'll head back to the ranch now." As they retrieved their horses and mounted up, Amelia saw the stranger exit the mercantile and scan the street. His gaze locked on them for a moment before he turned and entered the hotel. The ride back to Silverhorn was tense, with Quincy setting a faster pace than they had on the journey in. Amelia's muscles protested the unaccustomed activity, but fear gave her the strength to keep up. It was only when they passed under the ranch arch that she allowed herself to relax slightly. "You think he was looking for me?" she said as they approached the main house. Quincy helped her dismount before answering. "I think it's a strong possibility." A man like that, well-dressed but carrying a gun under his coat in a town like Anima's Forks, he's not there for the mining opportunities. "A bounty hunter?" Amelia asked, her voice barely a whisper, "or a private detective?" Quincy replied. "Either way, we need to be cautious. I'll warn the men to keep an eye out for strangers." That evening, Quincy explained the situation to his father, who received the news with grim acceptance. "So your past is catching up with you," Jacob said to Amelia. "I suspected it might." "I'm sorry," she said miserably. "I never meant to bring trouble to your door." Jacob waved away her apology. "Trouble finds Silverhorn regularly without your help, my dear. One more enemy makes little difference." "Father's right," Quincy agreed, "and we don't know for certain that man was looking for you. But we'll take precautions regardless." Those precautions became evident the next day as Amelia noticed armed men patrolling the ranch perimeter more frequently. Quincy himself seemed tenser, checking his rifle and pistol each morning before riding out, and returning earlier than usual each evening. 3 days after their trip to town, Amelia was helping Maria hang laundry when she saw a cloud of dust on the road, a single rider approaching at speed. Her heart leapt into her throat as Bennett, who was on watch near the main gate, rode out to intercept the visitor. Maria noticed her distress. "Is okay," she said in her limited English. "Mr. Quincy he protect." Amelia managed a strained smile. "Yes, I know." The rider turned out to be a boy from town delivering a message for Quincy. Amelia watched from the window as Quincy read the note, his expression growing dark. He spoke briefly to the boy, then strode toward the house. Amelia met him at the door. "What is it?" she asked, dreading the answer. "Message from Sheriff Wilson," Quincy said, his voice tight. "A man's been asking questions in town about a young woman fitting your description who might have arrived in the last few months." He took a deep breath. "He's identified himself as a representative of Arthur Blackburn of Denver, looking for his missing stepdaughter." The room seemed to tilt sideways. Amelia gripped the doorframe for support. "He found me," she whispered. Quincy's hand came to rest on her shoulder, steady and warm. "Not yet, he hasn't, and I aim to keep it that way." "What can we do? If he comes here, he'll find a united front," Quincy assured her. "The sheriff's note was a warning Wilson may be in Maxwell's pocket, but he respects my father enough to give us a heads up." Despite Quincy's confidence, a cold dread settled in Amelia's stomach. That evening, she found it difficult to concentrate on Jacob's stories or the book Quincy was reading aloud. Her thoughts kept returning to the stranger in the mercantile and what his presence meant. When Jacob retired for the night, Quincy drew Amelia into the study, a room they rarely used, with thick walls that ensured privacy. "There's something I need to ask you," he said, his expression solemn, "and I need the absolute truth." Amelia nodded, her throat tight. "Of course." "This man, Blackburn, does he have any legal claim on you? Are you underage or somehow bound to him by law?" "No," Amelia said firmly. "I'm 21 years old. Arthur has no legal authority over me whatsoever. His only claim is that I left without repaying him for my room and board after my mother died. But that's a lie. The house was my mother's, paid for with her inheritance. Arthur simply took possession when she died." Relief washed over Quincy's face. "Good, that's what I needed to know." He paced the room once, then stopped before her. "Amelia, I have a proposal for you, one that would resolve this situation permanently," her heart stuttered. "A proposal?" Quincy took a deep breath. "Marry me." The words hung in the air between them, startling in their simplicity. "What?" Amelia managed, certain she had misheard. "Marry me," Quincy repeated, taking her hands in his. "As my wife, you would have the full protection of the Calloway name and resources. No court in the territory would uphold Blackburn's claims against a married woman, especially one whose husband is as established as I am." Amelia stared at him, trying to process his words. "You would marry me, to protect me." A faint flush colored Quincy's cheeks. "That's one reason, yes. But not the only one." His grip on her hands tightened slightly. "Amelia, these past weeks, I've come to care for you deeply, more than I thought possible after knowing someone for such a short time." "Quincy," she breathed, hardly daring to hope. "I'm not a poetic man," he continued, his blue eyes earnest, "but I know my own heart, and it tells me that what I feel for you is real and true. I believe we could build a good life together, not just one of convenience." Tears pricked at Amelia's eyes. "I care for you too," she admitted. "More than I should, perhaps, given my circumstances." "Then say yes," Quincy urged. "We'll be married by Judge Parker tomorrow before Blackburn's man can cause any trouble." The speed of it all made Amelia's head spin. "But your father already approves," Quincy assured her. "I spoke with him this afternoon. He said, and I quote, 'About time you showed some sense, boy. That girl's the best thing to happen to this ranch in years.'" A laugh bubbled up through Amelia's tears. It was exactly the sort of thing Jacob would say. "So?" Quincy prompted, his expression a mixture of hope and uncertainty. In that moment, standing in the book-lined study with her hands held in Quincy's strong, capable ones, Amelia realized that what had begun as a desperate flight had led her exactly where she was meant to be. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you, Quincy Calloway." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "You've made me the happiest man in Colorado territory," he murmured against her hair. When he drew back to look at her, his eyes were full of a tenderness that made Amelia's heart swell. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Quincy lowered his head and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle yet full of promise. In that kiss, Amelia found the answer to a question she hadn't known she was asking. What does coming home feel like? It felt like this. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. Mrs. Perkins, when informed of the impending nuptials, became a whirlwind of efficiency, directing Maria to prepare special foods while she herself retrieved a long-preserved wedding gown from a cedar chest. "Mrs. Calloway's dress," she explained when Amelia protested that it was too fine for her. "Catherine would have wanted it used for a happy occasion, not left to the moths, and you're just about her size." The dress was a marvel of ivory silk and delicate lace, slightly yellowed with age but otherwise perfect. When Amelia tried it on, even the practical Mrs. Perkins grew misty-eyed. "You'll do," she said gruffly, adjusting the lace at Amelia's throat. "Mr. Quincy won't know what hit him." Judge Parker arrived shortly before noon, having ridden from Anima's Forks at Quincy's urgent request. A small, precise man with spectacles and a formal manner, he betrayed no surprise at being asked to perform a wedding on such short notice. In frontier communities, hasty marriages were common enough, though usually for different reasons. The ceremony took place in the parlor, with Jacob seated in his favorite chair and the household staff gathered as witnesses. Bennett stood as Quincy's best man, while Mrs. Perkins, to her evident pleasure, acted as Amelia's matron of honor. Quincy, dressed in his finest clothes, waited by the fireplace, his expression a mixture of nervousness and joy. When Amelia entered in Catherine Calloway's gown, a simple wreath of late wildflowers in her hair, his face transformed with wonder. "You're beautiful," he whispered when she reached his side. Judge Parker performed the ceremony with dignified efficiency, leading them through the traditional vows. When Quincy placed a ring on Amelia's finger, a delicate gold band with tiny diamonds that had been his grandmother's, the reality of what they were doing finally struck her. This was no temporary arrangement or mere legal protection. This was a lifetime commitment. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Parker declared, closing his prayer book with satisfaction. "Mr. Calloway, you may kiss your bride." Quincy's kiss was tender but restrained, mindful of their audience. Still, Amelia felt the promise in it, the deep current of feeling that had grown between them since that first meeting on the steps in Anima's Forks. A modest celebration followed. With champagne Jacob had been saving for a special occasion, and a wedding cake Maria had somehow managed to create on short notice. The ranch hands were given the afternoon off to join in the festivities, and their genuine affection for Quincy was evident in their hearty congratulations. As the party wound down, Judge Parker prepared to depart, taking with him the signed marriage certificate that would be registered in the county records. "One more thing," Quincy said, drawing the judge aside. Amelia followed, curious. "We'd like you to deliver a message to a man who may be staying at the hotel in town, a representative of Arthur Blackburn from Denver." Judge Parker raised an eyebrow. "I've heard there is such a person asking questions." "Please inform him that Miss Amelia Rose no longer exists," Quincy said firmly. "She is now Mrs. Quincy Calloway, legal wife of a Colorado Territory property owner with all rights and protections therein. Any claims against her from her previous life are null and void." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "I'll convey the message, and I'll add that the courts here take a dim view of harassment of married women." He glanced at Amelia. "I take it this marriage resolves some difficulty." "It resolves everything," Amelia said with quiet confidence, leaning into Quincy's side. After the judge and most of the celebration guests had departed, Jacob called Quincy and Amelia to his study. Despite the day's excitement, the old man seemed energized, his blue eyes bright. "Sit down, both of you," he directed, taking his place behind the large oak desk. "Now that you're officially a Calloway, Amelia, there's ranch business to discuss." Quincy looked puzzled. "Father, surely this can wait until tomorrow." "It cannot," Jacob stated firmly. "Because I've made a decision that affects both of you." He pulled a document from a drawer and laid it on the desk. "Effective immediately, I'm transferring full ownership of the Silverhorn to you, Quincy, and by extension to your wife." Shock registered on Quincy's face. "Father, no. You don't need to do this." "I'm not dying yet," Jacob growled, "if that's what you're thinking, but I'm not a young man and recent events have reminded me of my mortality." He tapped the document. "I've watched you run this ranch for the past 3 years while I pretended to still be in charge. It's time to make it official." Amelia remained silent, sensing this was primarily between father and son, but Jacob turned his sharp gaze to her next. "And you, my dear, I wasn't sure about you at first, I'll admit. Thought you might be a fortune hunter or worse." His expression softened. "But I've seen how you look at my son and how he looks at you. That's real. I know it when I see it." "It is real," Amelia confirmed softly, reaching for Quincy's hand. "Good." Jacob pushed the document toward them. "Sign here, both of you. I've already had Judge Parker witness my signature." Quincy hesitated. "Father, are you certain?" "Never more so," Jacob replied firmly. "Now sign the damned paper so I can retire in peace." With a bemused shake of his head, Quincy signed, then passed the pen to Amelia. She hesitated only briefly before adding her new name, Amelia Calloway, to the document that made them owners of one of the largest ranches in Colorado Territory. "There," Jacob said with satisfaction, reclaiming and folding the paper. Now get out of here. You've got better things to do on your wedding night than listen to an old man talk business. Quincy's face flushed, but he stood and offered his hand to Amelia. Thank you, Father, he said simply. Jacob waved them away. Go on, be happy, that's all the thanks I need. As they left the study, Amelia felt a strange mixture of emotions: gratitude, joy, anxiety, and most of all, a deep sense of belonging that she had never expected to find again after losing her parents. That night, as husband and wife, Quincy and Amelia discovered a new dimension to their relationship. What had begun as tender feelings blossomed into passionate love, their bodies expressing what words had only begun to convey. In Quincy's gentle strength and unwavering regard, Amelia found healing for wounds she hadn't known still pained her. And in Amelia's trust and vulnerability, Quincy found the missing piece of his life: a partner who understood both the man and the legacy he carried. Dawn found them still awake, talking quietly in the intimate darkness of what was now their shared bedroom. No regrets? Quincy asked, tracing the curve of Amelia's cheek with his fingertip. None, she replied truthfully. Though everything has happened so quickly, I feel as if I've known you much longer than a few weeks. Some things don't need time, Quincy said. They just need the right moment. He pulled her closer. When I saw you sitting on those steps in town, so proud despite your circumstances, so beautiful even in your distress, something inside me recognized you. Like I'd been waiting for you without knowing it. Amelia laid her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I was at the lowest point of my life that day, hungry, desperate, with nowhere to turn. She smiled at the memory, and then you appeared like something from a dream, offering to share your meal as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I couldn't have ridden past, Quincy admitted. Though I didn't expect that simple act would change my life forever. They drifted to sleep as the sun rose, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. 3 days later, as Amelia was arranging fresh flowers in the parlor, Bennett rode in with news from town. The stranger Blackburn's man had departed on the eastbound stage after receiving Judge Parker's message. Judge said the fellow didn't take it well at first, Bennett reported to Quincy in the yard, unaware that Amelia could hear through the open window. Threatened legal action and such. But when the judge explained that any further harassment would be considered a criminal offense, and mentioned that the Calloways have friends in the territorial government, he backed down. Relief washed over Amelia. The immediate threat was gone, though she harbored no illusions that Arthur Blackburn would easily abandon his quest for revenge. Still, she was a married woman now, with the protection of a respected name and a community that looked after its own. Life at Silverhorn settled into a new rhythm as autumn deepened toward winter. Amelia's role evolved from servant to mistress of the house, a transition made smoother by Mrs. Perkins's steady guidance and the ranch hands' ready acceptance of their boss's new wife. Jacob, true to his word about retirement, spent more time reading by the fire and less time concerning himself with ranch business, though he remained a sharp-eyed advisor when asked. He and Amelia developed a warm relationship based on mutual respect and a shared love of literature, spending many afternoons discussing books from the extensive library. Winter came early that year, blanketing the valley in snow and restricting travel to essential journeys only. The isolation might have been oppressive, but Amelia found it oddly comforting, a cocoon in which her new life and marriage could develop without outside pressures. Christmas at Silverhorn proved to be a joyous affair, with the house decorated with evergreens and ribbons, and a feast that brought together both the ranch household and the men from the bunkhouse. Quincy presented Amelia with a beautiful leather-bound journal, knowing her love of words, while she gave him a silver watch, fob she had secretly commissioned during their last trip to town before the snow. As the new year of 1872 approached, Amelia realized with surprise that she had been at Silverhorn for nearly 3 months, and married for most of that time. What had begun as desperate flight had transformed into the most secure and happy period of her adult life. On New Year's Eve, as they sat before the fire in their bedroom, Quincy sensed her reflective mood. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Calloway." Amelia smiled at the name she was still growing accustomed to. "I was just thinking about how much has changed since we met. How different my life is now from what I had expected." "Better or worse?" Quincy asked, a hint of teasing in his voice. "Infinitely better," she assured him, leaning against his shoulder. "Though I do wonder sometimes what the future holds." Quincy wrapped his arm around her. "Well, I reckon spring will bring calving and foaling, summer will mean moving the herds to higher pasture, fall will not the ranch future," Amelia interrupted with a laugh. "Our future. Yours and mine." "Ah," Quincy grew more serious. "What would you like it to hold?" Amelia hesitated, then decided honesty was the foundation of their relationship. "Children someday, a family of our own to add to this legacy your father has entrusted to us." Quincy's face lit with a joy that took her breath away. "I'd like that too," he said softly, "very much." As midnight approached, they joined Jacob and the household staff in the parlor to welcome the new year with champagne and optimism for what lay ahead. What lay ahead, as it turned out, included both joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge, as is the way of life. Spring brought the expected birth of calves and foals, but also the unexpected news that Amelia was expecting a child of her own. The announcement brought tears to Jacob's eyes and a barely contained whoop of delight from Quincy, who lifted Amelia off her feet in his exuberance before setting her down gently with a worried, "Should I not do that now?" Summer saw the expansion of Silverhorn's horse breeding program, with Quincy securing a contract to provide mounts for the cavalry at Fort Collins, a substantial achievement that further established the ranch's reputation for quality. It also brought a letter from Denver that Amelia opened with trembling hands. Inside was a brief note from her former maid, informing her that Arthur Blackburn had suffered financial reverses and had moved to San Francisco, abandoning his quest for vengeance in the face of more pressing concerns. "We're truly free," she told Quincy that night, tears of relief staining his shirt as he held her. "We always were," he reminded her gently, "but I'm glad you no longer have to look over your shoulder." Autumn came with golden days and crisp nights, the valley a riot of color as the aspens turned. Amelia's pregnancy progressed well, her body rounding with new life as she and Quincy prepared for the arrival of their child. But winter brought the first real test of their young marriage. Jacob, whose health had seemed stable, suffered a severe stroke just after Christmas. For days, he lingered between life and death, with Quincy and Amelia taking turns at his bedside. "Stay with us, Father," Quincy urged, his voice rough with emotion. "Your grandchild needs to meet you." Whether it was the mention of the coming baby or simply his indomitable will, Jacob rallied, though he emerged from the crisis greatly diminished. His right side remained partially paralyzed and his speech was slurred, but his mind stayed sharp as ever, with the help of Mrs. Perkins and a young ranch hand assigned as his personal attendant. Jacob adapted to his new limitations with the same stubborn determination he had shown throughout his life. By the time spring returned, he had regained enough mobility to sit on the porch and supervise the ranch activities from a distance. On a warm May morning in 1873, Amelia gave birth to a son they named James Jacob Calloway, in honor of both Amelia's father and his paternal grandfather. The birth was difficult but uncomplicated, attended by Mrs. Perkins, who had helped deliver many ranch babies over the years, and a midwife brought from town. When Quincy first held his son, the look of wonder on his face brought fresh tears to Amelia's eyes. "He's perfect," Quincy whispered, gently touching the downy head with its hint of sandy hair like his own. Jacob's meeting with his namesake was equally moving. The old man, now confined mostly to a wheelchair, held the infant with his good arm, tears streaming unashamedly down his weathered face. "A new Calloway," he said, his speech slow but comprehensible. "Silverhorn's future." Life with a new baby brought challenges and exhaustion, but also a deepening of the bond between Quincy and Amelia. They discovered new aspects of each other as parents: Quincy's unexpected talent for soothing the colicky infant, Amelia's fierce protectiveness that reminded Quincy of a mother wolf with her cub. Young Jamie, as they called him, thrived in the ranch environment, surrounded by love and the constant stimulation of a working estate. By his first birthday, he was toddling determinedly after his father whenever Quincy was in the house, and babbling happily to his grandfather, who doted on the boy with unrestrained affection. The summer of 1874 brought renewed tension with the Maxwell Ranch. Clive Maxwell, still nursing the decades-old grudge, began aggressively expanding his operation, pushing the boundaries of his property closer to Silverhorn land. Small incidents cut fences, scattered cattle, water rights disputes escalated into more serious confrontations between ranch hands. "This can't continue," Quincy told Amelia one night after returning from a boundary patrol where shots had been fired, though thankfully no one was injured. "Someone's going to get killed if this goes on." "What will you do?" Amelia asked, worry etching lines around her eyes. "I've sent for the territorial marshal," Quincy replied. "This goes beyond local sheriff jurisdiction now, and I've written to Governor Evans. We have supporters in Denver who can apply pressure if needed." The arrival of Marshal Harrington, a no-nonsense federal lawman with a reputation for fairness, changed the dynamic dramatically. After investigating claims on both sides, he called a meeting between Quincy and Clive Maxwell on neutral ground. Amelia insisted on accompanying Quincy, despite his concerns for her safety. "We present a united front," she said firmly, "the Calloways together." The meeting took place at the Animas Forks Courthouse, with Marshal Harrington presiding and Judge Parker in attendance. Clive Maxwell, a florid man with cold eyes and his father's bitter temperament, arrived with his lawyer and younger brother. "This ends today," Marshal Harrington announced without preamble. "I've reviewed the land grants, the property records, and the history of complaints. The boundary between Silverhorn and Maxwell land is clearly established by survey markers placed by the territorial government 10 years ago." He fixed Clive with a hard stare. "Any attempt to move or dispute these markers will be considered a federal offense. Furthermore, the water rights to Silver Creek belong jointly to both properties, as specified in the original land grants." Maxwell's lawyer began to protest, but the marshal cut him off. "This isn't a negotiation. It's a ruling. You'll abide by it or face federal charges." He turned to Quincy. "The same applies to Silverhorn, though I note that all documented incursions have been from Maxwell riders onto Callaway land, not the reverse." The formality of the ruling, backed by federal authority, effectively ended the active conflict. Though relations between the neighboring ranches remained cool, the outright hostilities ceased, allowing both properties to focus on their operations rather than their feud. "Your father would be proud of how you handled that," Amelia told Quincy as they rode home from the meeting. "You found a solution that didn't involve bloodshed." "I had a good reason to seek peace," Quincy replied, glancing at her with a smile. "Several good reasons, in fact. Those reasons multiplied in 1875 with the birth of their daughter, Catherine Rose Calloway, named for both grandmothers." Where Jamie had his father's sandy hair and sturdy build, little Cat was delicate like Amelia, with a head full of dark curls and her father's vivid blue eyes. Jacob, now mostly confined to his room but still sharp of mind, welcomed his granddaughter with the same joy he had shown for Jamie. "A beauty," he pronounced, his gnarled finger gently tracing the baby's perfect cheek. "Like her mother." Life at Silverhorn settled into the rhythms of a successful ranch and a growing family. The children flourished in the freedom of country living, developing the self-reliance and practical skills that frontier life demanded. Jamie showed an early interest in horses, trailing after the stable hands from the time he could walk, while Kat revealed a love of books that delighted both her mother and grandfather. In 1876, Colorado achieved statehood, an event celebrated with particular enthusiasm at Silverhorn. "We're no longer territorial pioneers," Quincy told his children at the special dinner held to mark the occasion. "We're citizens of the newest state in the Union. Does that change anything?" 7-year-old Jamie asked, more interested in his dessert than politics. "It means stronger laws, better schools eventually, and a greater say in how we're governed," Quincy explained patiently. It's a good thing for your future. That future continued to unfold with the steady progression of seasons and years. Jacob Calloway lived to see his 80th birthday in 1877, an occasion marked by a grand celebration that brought neighbors and friends from miles around. Though physically diminished, his mind remained keen until the end, which came peacefully in his sleep just after harvest time that same year. The loss hit Quincy hard, despite having had years to prepare for his father's passing. Amelia stood by him through the grief, offering strength and understanding as he adjusted to being the senior Calloway, the keeper of the legacy that had begun with his father's arrival in the valley nearly 40 years earlier. In time, the sharp pain of loss gave way to fond remembrance, with Jacob's spirit living on in the stories told to the children and the values that continued to guide the ranch. The 1880s brought both prosperity and change to Silverhorn. The expansion of the railroad made shipping horses and cattle to eastern markets more profitable, while also bringing new settlers to the region. Anima's Forks grew from a small mining town to a respectable community with a proper school, a bank, and even a small opera house where traveling shows performed occasionally. Jamie and Kat attended the town school during winter months when ranch work was less demanding, receiving a solid education supplemented by their mother's extensive knowledge of literature and history. As they grew into teenagers, their distinct personalities emerged more clearly. Jamie practical and hands-on like his father, Kat thoughtful and observant like her mother, but with a streak of Calloway stubbornness that served her well. In 1889, as Silverhorn prepared to celebrate its 50th year as a ranch, Amelia found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this place and this life. Standing on the porch one evening as the sun set behind the mountains, she was so lost in thought that she didn't hear Quincy approach until his arms slipped around her waist. "Deep thoughts, Mrs. Calloway?" he asked, his voice still sending the same thrill through her after all these years. "I was remembering," she said, leaning back against him. "That day in Anima's Forks when a hungry, desperate woman sat crying on the steps of the general store and a kind cowboy offered to share his meal." Quincy rested his chin on her shoulder. At 45, he was still strong and vital, though silver now threaded the sandy hair at his temples. "Best decision I ever made," he said simply. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd ridden past that day?" Amelia asked. "If you hadn't stopped?" "No," Quincy replied without hesitation, "because I couldn't have ridden past. Something about you called to me from the moment I saw you." He turned her gently to face him, "And every day since has confirmed what I knew then, that we were meant to find each other." Amelia touched his face, still handsome despite the lines that years of sun and wind had etched around his eyes and mouth. "From desperation to abundance," she mused. "That's been my journey." "Our journey," Quincy corrected, drawing her close, "and it's far from over." Indeed, as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the journey continued. Jamie took on more responsibility at the ranch, eventually marrying Mary Sullivan, the daughter of a neighboring rancher. Kat, to everyone's surprise, announced her intention to attend college in Denver, a decision that would have been unthinkable in Amelia's day, but which Quincy supported without reservation. "The world is changing," he told Amelia after they'd seen Kat off on the train. "Our children will see things we can't even imagine. Are you sorry?" Amelia asked. "That she's chosen books over the ranch," Quincy shook his head. "Silverhorn will always be here for her if she wants it, but she has your intelligence and curiosity. She deserves the chance to use those gifts." By 1910, Silverhorn had evolved with the times while maintaining its core identity. Jamie, now the effective manager of day-to-day operations, had introduced modern breeding techniques and more efficient farming methods. Kat, having earned a degree in education, had returned to Anima's Forks to establish a proper high school, bringing higher learning to a community that had once been satisfied with basic literacy. And through it all, at the center of the ranch and the family, remained Quincy and Amelia. Their love had deepened with the years, tempered by shared joys and sorrows, strengthened by challenges overcome together. On a warm summer evening in 1911, Exactly 40 years after their first meeting, they sat together on the garden bench that had been their special place since the early days of their relationship. The garden had changed over the decades, with new plants added and pathways redirected, but the bench remained in the same spot beneath what was now a massive apple tree. 40 years, Amelia marveled, her hand clasped in Quincy's as it had been countless times before. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I sat on those steps, crying from hunger and despair. And sometimes it feels like we've always been together, Quincy added, as if there was no life before you. They sat in companionable silence, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. At 67 and 61, respectively, they had slowed somewhat, but both remained active in ranch life and community affairs. Any regrets? Quincy asked, echoing a question he had posed on their wedding night so long ago. Amelia considered before answering. Only that we can't live forever, she said at last. That there will come a day when one of us must go on without the other. Quincy squeezed her hand. When that day comes, the one who remains will have a lifetime of memories to sustain them, and the knowledge that we'll be reunited eventually. Such faith, Amelia said with a smile. Not faith, Quincy corrected. Certainty, some bonds can't be broken, not even by death. As twilight deepened around them, they remained on the bench, two figures silhouetted against the fading light, living proof that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with the simplest acts of kindness. A cowboy had opened his saddlebag and offered to share a meal with a hungry woman. And in doing so, he had shared his life, his legacy, and his love, creating a story that would be told at Silverhorn for generations to come.